Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Religion Unplugged podcast. I'm Matthew Peterson. Today, I will be speaking with Jeffrey J. Kripal, who holds the J. Newton Razor Chair in Philosophy and Religious Thought at Rice University, and who is an author of over a dozen books. We'll be talking about his recent book, How to Think Impossibly, about souls, UFOs, time, belief, and everything else. Jeff, thanks so much for letting me talk with you today and letting me try to think impossibly with you.
Thanks. I'm trying to think impossibly too, Matthew. Don't worry. We're in this together.
Well, I think if we're gonna try and do that, I always like to start out interviews with authors with just understanding fundamentally the terms in the title. So I would love if you could just break down what it means, what you mean by the word impossible.
Yeah. So I actually really like the word impossible. The argument in the book is that what's impossible is a function of our worldview.
Mm,
It's really not a function of what happens.
mm,
And so I study extraordinary or exotic experiences that happen to human beings all the time. And then they're embarrassed to tell these stories because they live in a culture where these things aren't supposed to happen.
mm,
And they violate the terms or the categories of whatever the worldview in place is. And I find that conflict fascinating. And that's why I use the term the impossible, because I don't mean, of course, literally impossible. I mean something that happens that's not supposed to happen in the
mm.
terms of the worldview.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as kind of a setting up part of your overall thesis early on in the book, you say that this is a book about why the humanities must stop ceding reality to the sciences.
Right.
What do you mean by that, and why do you care so much about it?
Well, I teach in a university, and it's heavily oriented towards STEM. And I think I have a kind of crisis. I mean, it's like we're losing students. Our enrollments are dipping, and it's a cultural problem. I don't blame my university for it. It's a cultural wide issue. And I think humanists and historians and philosophers in general think that the sciences have some kind of lock on reality, and that it's some kind of materialism. And I just think that's wrong. They don't have a lock on reality. And I think materialism does a lot of good things for us. It creates a lot of technology and science, but it's really quite awful and bad when it comes to human values and human experience. It basically explains everything except us,
Hmm.
which is a huge hole or abyss. Um,
Yeah. Do you have any specific example of like a way that you think science tries to explain humanity in a way that you think is really dangerous and or destructive in some way?
Well, I think humanists in general who follow the sciences, whether intentionally or not, think of the human being as some kind of social animal,
Hmm.
and think of all of our actions as historically or culturally conditioned. And I think that human beings often have experiences that are not historically or culturally conditioned, and they won't talk about those things to us because we generally don't listen to them. We don't have ways of understanding human experiences that are not functions of history or culture or society or embodiment or whatever the reigning category is. I think the sciences in general are a third person external perspective on things.
Hmm.
And you need to be able to manipulate physical reality to create predictive models and to quantify things and to mathematize them, and to create science, to create technology. And I think our perspective is a first person perspective. I don't think it's a third person. I think it's about subjectivity and consciousness at the end of the day. And that's just not something you can get on the in a scientific experiment or a mathematical formula.
Right. And I think the idea that humanity would be limited to uh, kind of biology, I understand that that would uniquely bother you because you talk about superhumanity, and how that is. I think basically what the essence of us is striving for, or already is. Can you break down your theory of superhumanity?
Yeah, I mean, the notion of the superhumanities is all the critical theories of the humanities, all of which I embrace and want to affirm, but it also affirms these exotic um, and extraordinary experiences that human beings routinely have. Near-death experiences, psychedelic experiences, out-of-body experiences, precognitive dreams, that this kind of thing. And I want to put those altered states on the table with the critical categories of race, class, gender, brain, embodiment, and so on. And so the superhumanities, it's not a denial of the humanities. It's a lifting up. It's an affirmation of these critical theories, but with adding into that mix the altered states that human beings often have reported, and I think are actually at the core of what we call religion today. I don't think you get religion without altered states. And I am pretty darn sure that human beings have been having altered states as far as we can see back all around the world.
Yeah, yeah, and I'd like to talk more about religion because at one point, we're called Religion Unplugged. Obviously, a large portion of our readership is religious. And at one point, you say such impossible thought precisely in its emphasis on the theoretical importance of cross-culturally available anomalous experience does not and cannot confirm the exclusivity of any religious tradition.
Right?
So I'm wondering, it can't prove that uh, one religion is true, but does it allow for people to hold a lot of your beliefs and still hold strong religious beliefs, even about the exclusivity of their religion?
Yeah, I hope so. What I'm trying to suggest is that, like, take the near-death experience. People have near-death experiences in every religion, in every culture, in every time. It it's not dependent actually on a particular belief system or a particular religion. It's dependent on human nature and
Mm.
what we are as human beings. And so I think these experiences are essentially the building blocks of these religions or of these cultures, but they're the building blocks and they
Mm.
exist everywhere and they're not exclusive to a particular tradition. And I think what religion has done, particularly in the West, particularly in the monotheistic traditions, has claimed a kind of exclusivity,
Mm.
a kind of truth for everyone for all time. And I just don't think that these experiences confirm that. I
Mm.
think quite the contrary, they disconfirm that.
Yeah, and was there ever a time in your life where you thought you did have the one structure of what all things
Well,
fit into?
well, sure. I mean, I think we all do growing up, and I grew up Roman Catholic, um, and I I was told, for example, I was told pretty constantly that Roman Catholicism is true because it's been around for 1,000 years and there are all kinds of miracles in it. And so obviously God is working within Roman Catholicism. Well, it turns out, as I later learned as a young man, that there are lots of religions that have been around for a long time and that
Mm.
miracles occur in all of these traditions. And
Sure.
so this is kind of the edge of what I'm trying to say is that it's an affirmation. What the impossible thinking is an affirmation of religious thought and religious belief, but it's very much a questioning or maybe even a denial of religious exclusivity.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Something I read a lot about in the book was just your value of imagination is unique in other things I've read.
Yeah,
And it's not the sort of like Disney World, if we can dream it, we can do it type of
right.
imagination. But it's sort of an idea that it seems like you don't consider uh imagination any less real than what we generally have called real. And I'm sort of curious, is the line between imagination and reality a line worth drawing or preserving?
Well, we don't really have a theory of the imagination
Hmm.
that, excuse me for coughing.
You're all good.
We just think the imagination is the imaginary. And we think that the human mind is just producing schlock. You know, your Disney reference. It's just producing little animals that talk a lot and theme parks and none of it is that actually corresponds to what's real. However, if you actually look at impossible experiences, they're clearly mediated by the imagination. They're
Hmm.
dreams, their visions, their apparitions, their out of body experiences, and yet they also give empirical facts about historical reality, about the physical world. And so there's
Hmm.
this fusion of the imagination and empirical reality that I want to lift up, and I want to say, hey, what about this? And it gets really extreme as I think you know from the book. I mean, the book begins with Zora Neale Hurston as a little girl on a porch, seeing in great detail all these scenes of her future life. Okay, well, what do you do with that?
Right.
Um, you can say that's fiction, but it wasn't fiction to her. She's not expressing that as a she's expressing that autobiographically as a significant experience in her life. You have to, if you're going to take Zora seriously, you have to take those visions seriously that happened to that 7-year-old little girl. And that's just the beginning, Matthew. That's,
Hmm.
my God. I mean, these just go on and on and on. And they involve physical reality. They involve what we call reality, but they also involve the human imagination. And I want to put a pin in that and say,
Hmm.
hey, look, this is weirder than we think. And what do we think about it?
Yeah.
What do we do? And of course, I don't claim to know. But what impossible thinking is thinking with, and I hyphenate thinking with these experiencers and questioning whatever one's own assumptions are. I don't care what they are.
Hmm.
I want the secular scientist to question physics and mathematics. I want the religious believer to question the categories and beliefs of whatever their belief system is. I want everyone to question everything, and move out of it into a bigger space.
Yeah. And you sort of had your own impossible occurrence. And if you're willing, I'd love to hear that firsthand. And then I'm curious, like, do you view that as imagination, or how do you view it? How did you experience it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, everyone asks me that. They want me to be some kind of fantastic magus or some kind of sorcerer magician. I think I'm a pretty much a spiritual dud, to be
Mm,
really honest about it. But I did have one out of body experience it was in called Calcutta in 1989, and it involved this energetic state and this out of body experience and a kind of massive downloading of information that, looking back on it, I think is the books I wrote. I think the books were downloaded into me, and of course, I had no context for them. I didn't wasn't aware what was being communicated to me, but it was obviously not ordinary or not normal. I mean, this was a kind of near death event, a kind of out of body experience, a kind of subtle energy awakening that was so extreme. Um, I mean, I thought I was dying,
mm,
and maybe I was. Um, so it was very extreme, and it made me, I would say that event, which is by far the most traumatic of these experiences I've had, made me deeply sympathetic,
mm.
to other human beings who report abductions or ecstasies or encounters with deities or kundalini events or whatever, however they want to frame them culturally. somewhere inside me, I'm like, yeah, that happens. I get that. Um, because I know it happens, because it happened to me. Nobody can tell me that didn't happen. Of course it happened. But was it mediated by the imagination? Yes,
Hmm.
absolutely. Absolutely mediated by my cultural imagination. Absolutely mediated by the culture that I was embedded in at the time, which was a kind of Bengali Shakta tantric culture. Um, so is culture important here and religious tradition? Absolutely. Was that experience reducible to those cultures? No, it
Hmm.
was not. Um, and so that's where I sit, Matthew. I mean, that's just one event that happened almost, what, 35 years ago. I'm an old man now. But I've listened to so many human beings relate even more exotic or more strange experiences that I've just grown very accustomed to that. And I think with it and I theorize with their experiences. And I think other people are gifts to us. I think intellectuals should think with them. I think their extraordinary experiences are new thought that's trying to break through, and it's often breaking through imaginally or symbolically or mythically in their experience, and they themselves can't theorize it. Matthew, they're not scholars of religion, they're not humanists, they're not historians, but we can. And I'm not saying at all that we're superior to them. That's not the point of this. It's that how can we put these experiences together with intellectuals who can then draw out what these experiences might mean?
Hmm. Yeah. I something I wanted to make sure I ask because I'm always, I think, most interested in this sort of thing is just talking about all the people you've talked to with just the wide variety of strange things you've heard. Is there any story that maybe didn't make it into the book very prominently or at all, that has just really stayed with you, like one or two maybe that you just hadn't really heard anything like it, and it's just sort of you just don't know what to do with it in a really unique way?
Well, I'm a writer, so I tend to write about people's experiences, and I most of the ones that have really had an impact on me, I've written quite a bit about.
Mm.
So, I mean, I've heard thousands of these,
Yeah.
and most of them have not gotten into books or essays, but the ones that really hit me have, and the ones that hit me most recently, I put in this book.
Mm.
And but sometimes I don't write about experiences because the people don't want me to,
Mm.
and I want to honor that and respect that. And so there's always this secrecy or this kind of censorship involved, but I do understand it. I do get it. And it's a kind of internal censorship too. That's what I want to say. It's like I don't I don't privilege the experiencer, by the way. I don't think the experiencer is the authority of his or her their own experience.
Mm.
But I also don't privilege the voice of the intellectual or the historian or the philosopher. I think they should be working together, and I think we should be very honest and open with the experiencers in that community about what we see and why we see it. I'll give you a good example. I'll be concrete here. I wrote an entire book with a woman named Elizabeth Crone, and it was on her near-death experience. She was struck by lightning in 1988 and had like a massive near-death experience, and then a whole series of paranormal after effects that affected not just her but her family and her surroundings. And Elizabeth and I talk, and I have also talked to other near-death experiencers, and they did not have the visionary display or content that Elizabeth had. They had a very different display and a very different content. And I don't sign my name to any of those afterlife displays or visions. but I try to put all those experiences together and then draw out what I think is going on. And so Elizabeth knows that. I mean, I'm not Elizabeth Crone, and I don't necessarily believe what Elizabeth Crone believes, but I deeply respect Elizabeth Crone, and I want to think with her experiences, and I want to theorize what might be at work in this greater kind of human story that I'm after. So I don't know. I hope that makes sense. The way I put it in this book is I I do not believe in beliefs, but I believe in belief. And what I mean by that is I think religious beliefs are incredibly provocative and catalytic, but I don't think the comparativists can agree to any of them because the comparativist knows about all of them and
Mhm.
that they all work. They all do different things for different human communities and cultures.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of those core things in the book that I definitely spent some time trying to wrap my head around what you meant, but I appreciate you speaking to it and breaking it down.
Well, it's this is this third space that I think is so important. It's a paradox. It's because I think in the public culture we we have a kind of skeptical or secular culture that reduces these things to psychopathology or hallucination or whatever it pulls out of thin air often. But then we have these believing communities that thinks the afterlife really is like this or thinks there really are such entities. And I want to sit in the middle of that and say, no, wait a minute. Let's take this all in. Let's keep this all on the table. Let's think about this as a whole and not as a part. So I'm not doing the debunking skeptical reduction, but I'm not doing the believing affirmation kind of thing. I'm trying to do something else. And that to me is how to think impossibly, is how can we hold that, what I call the both and?
Hmm. And how do you ever come across somebody or some idea that is nonsensical or feels impossible, and you really look it up and down and you don't think it's worth engaging with or worth
Yeah,
thinking much about?
I do. I do. There is fraud and there are people faking stuff.
Right.
I mean, that happens. And I am sure that I've been tricked at certain points in my life. Um, but I don't care.
Hmm.
I think that's inevitable. I think if you're going to work in the messiness of human experience, you're going to get messy. It's going to be messy. And I don't seek after purity. I think purity and certainty are very bad things, actually.
Hmm.
And I don't think they're what we should be doing or what we should be striving for.
Yeah, and could you break down further why purity is a bad thing?
Well, I'm using it metaphorically. I'm using
Sure.
purity metaphorically for certainty. If
Hmm.
you're certain about your worldview, I to me that's a problem.
Hmm.
Um, I I'm nervous about people who are certain.
Sure.
Um, and the book, by the way, is filled with comedians, including professional comedians, and there's a reason for that.
Hmm.
I think I think humor implies a kind of mild transcendence, maybe even a major transcendence. You can't laugh at something unless you're outside it.
Hmm.
And so I like worldviews that can laugh at themselves, and I get worried at worldviews that are too certain. Because those worldviews that are certain, they always end up, in my historical experience, blowing up.
Hmm.
And the certainty is never legitimate in the long run.
Yeah. And is it difficult sometimes to not turn your own theories of like just how how difficult it is to say that anything's certain into a form of certitude, to be certain about incertitude. Is that something you have to wrestle with?
Well, I mean, that's why I say all the time in the book, I'm not certain. I
Right.
mean, you just, I don't think, I think the best protection against certainty is acknowledging one's own humility and one's own ignorance. And I don't mean humility in some kind of moral sense. I I think humor is really important here too. I think we really do need to laugh at ourselves and William James talked about his own radical empiricism, and the reason he used the word empiricism is he knew he might be wrong, and he wanted to be able to say I was wrong about X, Y, or Z, and change his mind, and so do I. You know, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe this is correct. Maybe this is, and I never say it's right or true. I say this might be the way to go. This might be a
Sure.
direction, and I'm very aware actually of generations. Like you're a very young person, and I'm an old person and or older. And one of the things I like to poke the bear of my colleagues is I'm like, in my generation now is what I'm trying to say. I'm like, why are you worshiping whatever you read in the 1980s and 90s? Why is that the end all of everything? Why is that person even worthy of our attention? And of course, I don't think they are. I think
Hmm.
whatever we read and however we were trained in the 80s and 90s is just what was relevant and contemporary in the 80s and 90s. And it certainly has something to add to the conversation, but I don't want to stop there. And so sometimes people will say, they'll read a book like this and they'll say, well, this isn't religious studies. And I'm like, religious studies is whatever we say it is.
Hmm.
I mean, religious studies in the 1995 was not religious studies in 1965. The religious studies in 2025 will not be what it was in 1995. I mean, of course, it's not religious studies in the way you were thought that the field had to be. I hope not. I sincerely hope not. And so I think this notion of uncertainty and of the field shifting and of generations um, not accepting whatever they've been taught or whatever they've been educated into, I think is really important. Um, so to me, that's an intergenerational process.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that I don't leave out what was probably my favorite, just because it was so weird. My favorite portion of the book is all the talk of the mantis like beings that
Yeah,
people see all the time. I
right.
just want to know, because you talk about how later in the book, how a lot of times when people see demons, it's because they're very charismatic Christians who expect to see demons, so they end up seeing demons. Why do so many random people see mantises? What's your best theory?
Um, you know, one theory is that there are mantis beings. I mean,
Sure.
right? I mean, come
Right.
on. That's certainly open for me. The other the other theory is that maybe there's something about the mantis or the mantid that is, wired into our neurophysiology, and
Hmm.
and we're so we're so taken with insectoid beings or reptilian beings or whatever that there's something about us that came out, of course, and is related to those entities. Um, the other, the other I mean, Karen Austin, who appears in the book as well, has really challenged me on this. I mean, I think it's possible that um, these are physical, sort of AI entities essentially
Hmm.
that are doing doing stuff to us, and that some other species is basically trying to guide us or experiment with us or is concerned about us, and that these bug-like creatures are simply the way we would say today their AI works. Um, they would have said a robot, 40, 50 years ago. And before that, I don't know what they would, automaton or something. I don't know whether they would have said, but I think this language of something pseudo mechanical, um, or machine like or not human, I think is a pretty universal human experience. And I think the mantis entities that I talk about in the book a lot, well, they're everywhere. I mean, they literally are all over the globe and go back a long, long time, but they're really obvious
Yeah.
abduction material, and in the psychedelic literature, by the way, where they're just like right in your, literally in your face. I mean,
Hmm.
literally in your face.
Huh.
And why is that? I don't, I wish I knew.
Yeah. No. Well, thank you for indulging me on that. I just think it's a fascinating
It's
corner
weird,
of it.
isn't it? It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
weird. It's impossible, by the way. And
Mm,
Stuart Davis, who's one of my comedic experiencers here. I mean, he knows how absurd it is. He knows how absurd it sounds, but he's reporting what he experienced.
mm,
And I think that's really brave, and I just want to try to think with people like Stuart and theorize it. And once you do that, I mean, the way I was trained was you always bracket out the ontological. You never talk about the metaphysical. You talk about how things appear and how they interlanguage and art and ritual. And that does allow you to do a lot of different things in the study of religion. But if you talk to experiencers, the one thing they most want to talk about is ontology.
mm.
It is all about the nature of reality. That's what the whole thing is about for them.
Right.
And that's why I'm so suspicious of our suspicions. I'm
Mm,
like, well, we're cutting off exactly what they want to talk about. And then we say there's nothing religious about religion. Well, that's just because you just took it all away. You
sure.
just you just denied all of it. Of course, there's nothing left. It's
Mm,
all society. It's all brain. It's all gender. It's all embodiment. Whatever the case might be. I'm like, but it's not. It's just not all that. That's all true, but it's not adequate to what's going on.
okay, so we're about out of time, but I have to fit this in just because of what you just said and everything. I think my last question is just, is anything that has been experienced, can we call anything fake?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Oh, sure. I mean,
Okay.
I think deception, by the way, is at the core of a
Sure.
lot of this phenomenon. Um,
Sure.
but here's the thing. I think the phenomenon itself is deceptive.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, do human beings fake it? Yes, they do. They do.
Hmm.
But is the phenomena itself appearing as it really is? No, it's not.
Hmm.
It's appearing as something else. It's faking. It's creating a display that fits into our culture or our expectations, but that's actually not what it is. And again, I don't know what it is, but I know it's not that. I
Hmm.
know it's not that. And
Yeah.
I'll give you a simple metaphor, maybe to end here is my home church in Nebraska. There are these two walls with these gigantic stained glass windows. One is all about Jesus, one is all about Mary.
Hmm.
And, you know, those stained glass windows all have a history, and do all those narratives and all those stories have a precise history as well. But the sun still comes in and takes on the form and the shape of those stained glass windows, but it's still the same sun that shines in
Hmm.
the other churches and the temples and the synagogues and everything else. So I I want us to be both and. I want to affirm the stained glass windows, but I also want to affirm the light.
Hmm.
And I don't think they're the same, Matthew. I really don't think they're the same. And is deception occurring? Are we being tricked? Yes, often we are. Deception isn't necessarily bad
Right.
or sinister.
Hmm.
And um, the natural world certainly uses deception to pray, to eat, and to not be eaten,
Right.
to and to sexually reproduce. I mean, those are three functions where deception is just rampant. So I don't think whatever's deceiving us necessarily has bad intentions, but I do think it's largely about um, deception and displays that are not what the phenomena itself really is.
Mm.
And that's not exactly what you asked, Matthew, but I, and I also think some experiences are psychopathological in a destructive sense, or they are completely culturally conditioned or historically conditioned. I'm not suggesting otherwise. I'm just saying sometimes other things peep through, or the light shines through, and we have to take that seriously too, and not just dismiss it or reduce it to whatever our worldview is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I think that means we got everything that I was hoping to cover. And I really appreciate you letting me ask away, because there's just that book one makes me want to ask a billion more questions. Honestly, it's got lots and lots to unpack. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much for letting us talk to you today.
Yeah, no, I'm honored, and I'm happy to chat always.
Thank you.